it's the other way around is quite possible. And if he pushes too hard in his alliance with the Israeli regime, I think it's quite possible that he will be overthrown with the help of Iran. So I think he would probably he probably is very nervous right now, and that's why he's constantly traveling to the United States and taking part in peace board and all that sort of nonsense with Trump. Actually, I think it's clear that it is really the other way around. Iran's allies across the region are being prepared. In Iraq, the resistance knows that an attack on Iran, an existential attack on Iran, is an existential attack on Iraq for obvious reasons. In Yemen, the same is true. And these are countries that have enormous populations. U.S. allies in the region are all family dictatorships. And some of them are quite insignificant and small in their capabilities, like Qatar, which has a passport holding population of 350, 400,000. The Emirates, a passport population holding the passport holding population is 1.4 million, and the number of foreigners, or mostly adult males, are in the Emirates is like 10 million or so, I suppose. So they are very vulnerable and weak. Yet Iraq, with a population of 45 to 47 million, for example, can't be compared to Bahrain or Kuwait or anything like that. So if it's going to be a regional war, it's not to the benefit of the United States. It's something that Trump cannot manage. And Iran is also preparing its firepower too. The United States is bringing in everything that it has, but Iran is also preparing everything that it has too. And the fact that oil and gas go through the Persian Gulf, or they leave West Asia and the Caucasus, that gives Iran a huge advantage. And in addition to all that, I think there's the fact that none of these family dictatorships are very stable. None of them have real popular support. In some of these countries, the overwhelming majority are foreigners. So a war could actually change the map of the region. And you may see that some of these pro-Trump regimes will fall. War will be devastating, no doubt. And sitting here in Tehran, obviously, I recognize, and people here recognize, what it could mean. But it is not Iran that wants to carry out aggression. It is Trump and Netanyahu. And, of course, the collective West, which supports all acts of aggression, including genocide in Gaza. So what Iran can do and will do is that it and its allies will hit as hard as possible. They will bring down the global economy. And I think ultimately what will happen after great devastation across the region is that Trump will fail, he will fall, and the Israeli regime and the regime in Washington will be blamed for the catastrophe that befalls the entire world, because when oil and gas prices go through the roof during such uncertain times, and I know you've discussed this on your show, how the global economy and the U.S. economy in particular are facing major, major challenges. This would be catastrophic under any circumstances, a war of this nature. But under these circumstances, it would be even more devastating. And I think that people in the United States, the MAGA crowd, which now, of course, has no problem with endless wars. It has no problem with shooting white women in the face, or shooting white nurses in the back who take care of veterans. The MAGA crowd, who they don't care about Epstein and all his crimes. When their pockets are badly hit, when they lose their jobs, when factories shut down, when businesses go bankrupt, I think they will be the first to seek out those who are pushing for war.
around Iran. The Strait of Hormuz was temporarily closed for military exercises or fire drills by Iran. Yeah, this seems quite unprecedented. Something that many thought would be last resort, which now instead, of course, as a little warning perhaps. At the same time, the United States continues to accumulate more assets, especially than the U.S., as Gerald Ford, which has just entered yesterday, I think, the Mediterranean Sea. So with so many assets, it's hard to see this being reversed, as there's very difficult for Trump to find an off-ramp. I was wondering how you're seeing the situation now. Is it how severe is this?
From the very beginning, uh, it was clear that we're heading towards a major confrontation, although we don't know if it's actually going to be uh, aggression, military aggression or not, because it's Trump. That it was clear that the Israeli regime, the Zionist lobby, and the Epstein class that rules over the West, that they will do or want to do or wish to do anything possible to help the Zionist regime. And we saw how the U.S. ambassador uh, to Israel basically said that if the regime takes the whole of the region, it's fine. And that, I think, is something that we Iranians have been saying all along for many, many years. And others have been trying to hide this, both in the region and beyond. And, of course, the reason why there's so much antagonism towards Iran, towards Hezbollah, towards Ansarullah, towards the resistance in Iraq, and of course towards the Palestinian people, is that they are the only ones who are standing in the way of the greater Israel project. All the other countries, whether it's Erdogan or the Emirates or the Egyptian government and so on, Qatar and others, Jordan and so on, they are a part of the American empire, and therefore they will not make any move to prevent the Israeli regime from making progress until possibly when it's far too late. But Iran is not going to back down, and I do not see a scenario where the Americans win any potential war. The Iranians have said that they will shut down the Strait of Hormuz. It will not be a last resort measure. In the 12-day war, there was no need for Iran to shut down oil and gas trade in the region, because the war was largely between Iran and the Israeli regime. The Americans carried out a token strike. They didn't obviously obliterate the nuclear program, but it wasn't enough to justify destroying the global economy. Iran does not want the global economy, excuse me, Iran does not want the global economy to suffer. Iran has friends across the world, and ordinary people in all countries want to live in peace and maintain uh, the ability to make money and to raise kids and have families and have decent communities. So Iran, even though the regimes in the Persian Gulf region all host U.S. bases and were all helping the Israeli regime during the 12-day war through those bases, through allowing the Americans to use those bases, Iran, since it saw it could easily manage the war and defeat the Israeli regime, and ultimately the regime had to seek a ceasefire to end the war, it did not even contemplate moving in that direction. However, if the United States carries out an attack on Iran, that would be a different thing altogether. This would be an existential threat, and this would be a war for survival. It would be a war of choice for the Americans. It would be done for the Israeli regime, obviously. But in this scenario, Iran will do everything to protect itself. And since all these countries in these tiny Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region are hosting U.S. bases, and as you and I speak, those bases are being used to plan against Iran, then Iran has every right to shut down the oil and gas trade, and that will not be a measure of last resort. That will happen at the very beginning.
Well, this is a good point. If this is a war, existential threat, a war of survival, as you say, it makes sense that Iran would play its cards very differently. And the Gulf states obviously seem like this is unavoidable to be pulled in. But how else do you see the United States coming in? Because the whole element of surprise will be difficult to do now, that they'll be building up in these amounts. The rhetoric has clearly indicated that this is the intention. I mean, when assessing threats, you're looking at the intentions and capabilities. They're all pointing toward an attack, which could happen even over the next few days. So do you see any other possible elements of surprise they could introduce? I mean, would they use foreign fighters coming in from abroad to sabotage? Do they have the same networks within Iran which can disrupt? Can they attack through Azerbaijan? How are you seeing the element of surprise? Because I think this would be very critical for the United States to be successful. And again, with all the power or the military hardware it's been occurring in the region, if it has the element of surprise as well, this could be important. I would necessarily say decisive.
Iran's intelligence is quite effective. It knows what goes on more or less in surrounding countries. And inside the country, we saw the United States and the Israeli regime and British intelligence and possibly the French carry out an armed rebellion, a semi-coup in the country, something that they admitted, although Western media pretends that this was all about peaceful protesters. It was obviously not the case. We've seen endless footage of extreme violence carried out by the rioters and terrorists and the trained rioters. And we saw clear admissions by the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, by the Mossad in their Persian language statement, by Pompeo about both Israeli involvement, and later on he admitted U.S. involvement. And of course, Israeli Channel 14, close to Netanyahu, which said that foreign agencies brought in weapons to kill hundreds of Iranian police and security officials. So it's clear as day, while they're gloating about what they did, Western media pretends that none of this has happened and just inflate numbers, even though the West and the Israeli regime in particular are responsible for the bloodshed. They inflate the numbers and try to blame and say that the Iranians are killing peaceful protesters to justify death and destruction and massacre. They want to help build the case for war, whether it's The Guardian or Fox News. It doesn't make a difference. But after that, we saw that after January the 9th and the 10th, when this armed insurrection took place and immediately collapsed, and then we saw people come twice to the streets in defense of the state and the Constitution, both on January the 12th and on February the 11th in even bigger numbers. I think it's clear that the United States has no capability, nor the Israeli regime, to do anything substantial inside the country. And neighboring countries are far too vulnerable. Aliyev in Azerbaijan is very vulnerable. He's a dictator. He's he's not capable of harming Iran. In fact, it's the other way around is quite possible. And if he pushes too hard in his alliance with the Israeli regime, I think it's quite possible that he will be overthrown with the help of Iran. So I think he would probably he probably is very nervous right now, and that's why he's constantly traveling to the United States and taking part in peace board and all that sort of nonsense with Trump. Actually, I think it's clear that it is really the other way around. Iran's allies across the region are being prepared. In Iraq, the resistance knows that an attack on Iran, an existential attack on Iran, is an existential attack on Iraq for obvious reasons. In Yemen, the same is true. And these are countries that have enormous populations. U.S. allies in the region are all family dictatorships. And some of them are quite insignificant and small in their capabilities, like Qatar, which has a passport holding population of 350, 400,000. The Emirates, a passport population holding, the passport holding population is 1.4 million. And the number of foreigners, or mostly adult males, are in the Emirates is like 10 million or so, I suppose. So they are very vulnerable and weak. Yet Iraq, with a population of 45 to 47 million, for example, can't be compared to Bahrain or Kuwait or anything like that. So if it's going to be a regional war, it's not to the benefit of the United States. It's something that Trump cannot manage. And Iran is also preparing its firepower too. The United States is bringing in everything that it has, but Iran is also preparing everything that it has too. And the fact that oil and gas go through the Persian Gulf, or they leave West Asia and the Caucasus, that gives Iran a huge advantage. And in addition to all that, I think there's the fact that none of these family dictatorships are very stable. None of them have real popular support. In some of these countries, the overwhelming majority are foreigners. So a war could actually change the map of the region. And you may see that some of these pro-Trump regimes will fall. War will be devastating, no doubt. And sitting here in Tehran, obviously, I recognize, and people here recognize, what it could mean. But it is not Iran that wants to carry out aggression. It is Trump and Netanyahu. And, of course, the collective West, which supports all acts of aggression, including genocide in Gaza. So what Iran can do and will do is that it and its allies will hit as hard as possible. They will bring down the global economy. And I think ultimately what will happen after great devastation across the region is that Trump will fail, he will fall, and the Israeli regime and the regime in Washington will be blamed for the catastrophe that befalls the entire world, because when oil and gas prices go through the roof during such uncertain times, and I know you've discussed this on your show, how the global economy and the U.S. economy in particular are facing major, major challenges. This would be catastrophic under any circumstances, a war of this nature. But under these circumstances, it would be even more devastating. And I think that people in the United States, the MAGA crowd, which now, of course, has no problem with endless wars. It has no problem with shooting white women in the face, or shooting white nurses in the back who take care of veterans. The MAGA crowd, who, they don't care about Epstein and all his crimes. When their pockets are badly hit, when they lose their jobs, when factories shut down, when businesses go bankrupt, I think they will be the first to seek out those who are pushing for war.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary to see in such short time, in 1 year, how the MAGA crowd has changed. I mean, I was quite sympathetic to Trump's arguments during the campaign, that is ending the forever wars, reindustrializing, all of these things. But yeah, the monstrosity that has evolved out of this is, well, it's exact opposite. So it's very strange to see the support continuing, even though the policies have been put on its head. But in terms of the Israeli media, though, I mean, say what you will about the Israelis, at least their media, they tends to be a lot more honest than the Western, I feel, especially the Hebrew language. They're quite open about their participation in instigating the insurrection, coordinating it from abroad, supplying the weapons, also the objectives. While the Americans and Europeans talk about nuclear deal, they're quite honest. That's not what we want. We want, for Iran to be weakened, ideally destroyed. So you do see a very different. Let's celebrate it as honest. but I'm curious though. What is what is the objective here though towards in this for the Americans attacking Iran, because they won't commit ground troops, and again that would be a disaster of its own. But they talk about regime change, but there's no replacement government. Some talk about destroying the nuclear program, but that's allegedly been obliterated. I just don't see a story here how, even best case, if they get their objectives, what exactly is achieved. They can deliver, as you said, a lot of death and destruction to Iran. Of course, Iran can deal a heavy blow against the United States and its allies as well. But I don't see at the end of this security being enhanced for the United States. They're not going to walk away from this stronger. So what is the objective here in terms of, what to expect when the strikes comes in? Because it seems, well, predictable. They're going to go after political leadership, military leadership. But how will this success be defined? Because I'm watching, our different, our own journalists reporting on Iran, which means that they're sitting in Syria where they're celebrating the former success, and it's telling us what they're hearing from Iran. I mean, it's a bit, it's parody, but it's but I was wondering how you see this, the objectives.
Yes, and of course, Trump also said that he was the one who brought Jolani or Ashara to power. I mean, everything now is everyone has been exposed. And regional allies of the United States, Turkey and Jordan and Qatar and others, they've all been exposed to those who want to open eyes. So those who don't want to open their eyes, they will remain closed until the end of their days. But everything is clear: who stands with who, and who is actually supporting the Palestinian people, who is actually opposing genocide, who's actually actively opposing genocide. It's those entities that are being punished by the collective West, and those entities that are always antagonized by Western allies in the region, whether it's Qatar through their immense gas money, or others through their immense oil money, or through Erdogan, who gets gas money from Qatar to carry out his both propaganda operations and his military operations, and his support for ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other such terror groups. I think you touched upon a key point, and that is that the United States has not brought in ground troops. And if it wants to carry out a war with Iran, it will have to bring in maybe 1.5 million soldiers, which would, I think, on its own wreck the U.S. economy. It's probably not even doable. But without that, the United States loses the war, because the Iranians are on the ground, and Iran's allies are on the ground in Iraq, in Yemen, and elsewhere. And of course, in these dictatorships in the region, as I said, there are millions of people who are slaves, effectively, or indentured servants, and workers who have very few, if any, rights. And if there's chaos, if these countries, uh, their economies go downhill very fast, I can envisage a situation where the ruling families will be overthrown. In fact, I don't think they'll stand. I don't think they'll stay. They're probably already leaving. Many of the people around them, or their families, or some of the princes, they're probably already in their palaces in Europe and North America, waiting to see what happens. So, without a huge ground presence, how's the United States going to even defeat Iran? They can kill Iranians. They can't bring about regime change. Whoever they murder can be replaced. We have a constitution. Everything is clear as day. The country will be managed until the war comes to an end, and people will defiantly resist. And but after it starts, the United States can't stop it without losing face. So when the price of oil and gas go through the roof, when the United States starts giving casualties, so when its loyal proxies in the region begin to wobble and collapse, uh, how is Trump going to retreat, or how is he going to uh, shift away, or move away from conflict, and present himself as a victor? He won't be able to do so. And it's at a time, all this, when the situation is terribly bad for the United States anyway. We saw what happened with the Supreme Court yesterday. We've seen the conflict inside the United States over ICE and the murders carried out by ICE. We've seen how the gap between rich and poor in the United States is growing, how the Epstein class, most importantly, has been exposed, but has also been shown to be above the law, and it will remain above the law as things stand. All of this is going to cause the Trump to be in a very, very difficult situation. In fact, I would say it would be more than difficult, an impossible position. So this is not like 2003, where Western media back then could mobilize support for a war, and the U.S. government could get away with it. The American people are not as gullible as they were back then. They've seen the genocide in Gaza. They've seen the Epstein, well, a little bit of the Epstein files. But and when the economy collapses, I think that Trump will be in an impossible position. And as I said, it's the resistance that has troops on the ground, not the United States. Yemen today is much stronger than it was a year ago. Even when the United States carried out its 7-week war against Yemen and failed, that Yemen is different from this Yemen. In Iraq, the resistance is preparing itself. We've already seen them reveal underground bases full of drones and other capabilities. So it's not as if the United States is the only side that is preparing for war. The other side is preparing, but they also have ground forces in large numbers, and they have the ability to destroy everything in the Persian Gulf and on the other side of the Persian Gulf and in the Caucasus. And there's nothing that the United States can do about that. Not absolutely nothing. If anyone looks at the map, they'll see that the Persian Gulf is not very wide. Iran does not need its long-range missiles that it used against the Israeli regime and force it to beg for a ceasefire. It has hundreds of thousands of drones that could strike anything in the Persian Gulf. Oil rigs, ports, petrochemical facilities, refineries, tankers, of course, and other cargo ships, gas wells, oil wells, everything can be destroyed. And it would take many years to restore them. The longer the war lasts, if after 3 days, it'll be far worse than 2 days because it'll be irreversible. After 4 or 5, 6 days, it'll just get worse and worse. And even when the war comes to an end, it will take a lot more time to restore these capabilities. And no doubt the Iranians will be demanding compensation from these regimes anyway for hosting those U.S. bases. So I don't see how the United States could win. It's not possible. They can slaughter people, and they will. We saw how the Israelis bombed apartment blocks, and Western media pretended that these were precision strikes because they have no sense of morality. They have no sense of humanity. They are tools of the Epstein class. So Trump will bomb and slaughter. We saw last night the Israelis murder a large number of Lebanese children and an entire family as they were breaking their fast. No one in the West cares. In Gaza, they're slaughtering every day. No one cares. I mean, in the ruling class, in the media, the Epstein class, and those who work for them across the Western world. So they won't care when Trump bombs civilian infrastructure and murders ordinary Iranians. But that won't bring the United States victory. It will. This will all lead to defeat, and it will just be a matter of time when Trump will be forced to declare some fake victory and retreat. But everyone will know that the failure is his. I'm not for certain. I'm not sure that there will be war, and I'm not for war. But this is what I believe will happen. There will be destruction, a lot of destruction in Iran, because the United States and Israeli regime and Western regimes in general are all ruthless and inhumane. And we've seen that from the Epstein documents, what the nature of this crowd. But I think that the damage that will be done to the global economy will be far greater. When factories shut down, when businesses shut down, the building may still be there, but it'll be an empty building. And so then you will see, I think, people across the world on the move. Places in Latin America, if they're upset about immigration, the movement of people will be far greater than ever before in Africa and Asia. Even though Europe and North America will be in crisis mode themselves, but those are the traditional destinations. So there are so many bad things that can happen to the world, but Iran is going to defend itself. It's not Iran that has brought about this situation. It's not Iran that's engaging in genocide in Gaza. It's not Iran that is pushing for war. In fact, the reason why Iran is negotiating is partially to see if the United States is sane enough to have an acceptable deal. But even more importantly, what Iran is doing is it's telling the world that it's not us, it's them. So when the global economy goes down, everyone knows who to blame.
I guess the source of my pessimism, though, is with all this military hardware moving in and all this chest beating, it's impossible almost then to step down to again, as I began saying, finding this off ramp. Of course, as Trump suggests, all of this is to push Iran into a deal, but as you said, Iran is negotiating, but the whole question is, well, what kind of deal can actually be made here? At this point, some critics would say that the negotiations they appear to be a fraud. They're so far apart, and even what's on the table to be negotiated is not even agreed yet. Do you see the same problem with the negotiations? Are they too far apart, or do you think a deal could be made if Trump wants a victory to pull this whole thing back? I mean,
well, Iran is not going
JCPOA, for example.
Well, the thing is that the United States is not so far from its public comments. It's not talking about a JCPOA. It's talking about Iran's regional allies. That's off the table. Iran won't discuss them. It's talking about Iran's military capabilities. That's off the table. Iran won't discuss them. is talking about, in public at least, Iran giving up its nuclear program and its right to enrichment. All of that is off the table. But and a sign of Iran's strength and its position was what we saw during that show in Turkey when the United States was calling for the negotiations to be held there, and Turkey, of course, being a NATO entity. And then we saw from Al Jazeera a Turkish, Egyptian, Qatari proposal, which was quite disgusting, where Iran would stop supporting its regional allies, including Hamas, which shows that none of these three entities are supportive of the Palestinian resistance. In reality, they're just, they're in the U.S. camp. And reducing its military defense capabilities and so on, and its nuclear program. But Iran said no. And Iran said it will only negotiate with Americans, not in some group with, at some table with multiple countries, and that it will only negotiate in Oman. And ultimately, the Americans were forced to accept that. And the indirect talks that were held in Oman and then in Europe, but still with Omani mediation, showed that Iran, how firm Iran is in its position. But then again, we also have to remember that this is highly symbolic for Iran too. Iran is trying to remind everyone by restarting the indirect talks in Oman that this already happened once. And before the 12-day war, Iran and the United States had indirect talks. After the first round, as you recall, the United States accepted Iran's right to enrichment. Witkoff went on Fox News and admitted as such. And then in round two, they moved the goalposts, and 3, 4, the U.S. kept moving the goalposts at the insistence of the Zionist lobby, obviously. And ultimately, the United States, it turned out it was conspiring with the Israeli regime all along and it was being deceitful, and it carried out an attack. So the negotiations now that are taking place are of the same nature. The Iranians are not going to be fooled by the Americans, and they're telling the world that basically that we did this before, and we all recall what happened back then. I can't say what will happen. Iran, though, is preparing for war, and every day it is preparing further. Iran's capabilities today are significantly greater than they were during the 12-day war. The 12-day war was very helpful for Iran to discover its weaknesses and to improve its strengths. And since then, Iran has been working very hard on high-tech capabilities, air defenses, drone defenses, and of course, improving its offensive capabilities. But again, I would like to stress that the difference between the 12-day war and this war are on two fronts. One is that this will be a regional war. This will be a game changer. The second is that overwhelmingly, Iran's capabilities are directed towards the United States, not towards Israel. The long-range missiles that are directed towards occupied Palestine and the Mediterranean are necessary for entities that are far away. But Iran has far larger numbers of middle-range and short-range missiles and drones that can strike anything across the Persian Gulf region and the Indian Ocean. And those missiles are far larger in number and much more easy to move around. You don't need these big launchers. The same is true with the drones. And those underground bases that are spread out across the southern and central parts of Iran, they've been created, or they've been building them since the United States invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, and when Iran was declared the axis of evil, and Bush and then Obama started saying all options are on the table. So Iran's firepower that's directed towards the United States and its proxies and its assets in the region are far greater than what it used against the Israeli regime. And of course, Iran can still use those long-range missiles, which are now much larger in number, more precise, and with bigger payloads.
It's a good point to make about this changing the goalpost, because the negotiation tactic from Washington now, it is quite strange, especially given that Trump has sold himself as this ultimate deal maker. You see some similarities with the negotiations with the Russians. That is, they met in Anchorage, they made this basic deal, they recognized that the Russians made some painful concessions, and then once they have this in place, then they start to move the goalposts. Well, how about a little bbit more? And after a while, the foundation of that original deal is all but gone. It reminds me a bit, less of a political negotiator and more of a real estate deal, where the real estate agent will call the buyer or the seller, just have to move it a little bit more, a little bit this direction. And, essentially the former talk was all meaningless. Given that they are real estate negotiators, it is not, I guess, it could be a suitable analogy. But I wanted to ask, though, about Britain allegedly blocking America's use of Diego Garcia for an attack on Iran. Again, this is quite an important piece in the puzzle for the Americans, if they can then strike Iran from the south. And I was wondering, what do you make of this? Is this simply the divisions brewing between the UK and the US over other issues? Is this actually about what the British say, their concern for international law? Is an effort by the British? Yes, my reaction was the same when I read that official reasoning. Or is it an effort to stay out of this? Or again, alternatively, could also be attempted as deception against Iran. Don't worry about this direction. We're not going to hit you from Diego Garcia. But how are you seeing this? Because it is unusual for the U.S. to not have the unconditional support from the British.
Yes, it would be unusual, and that's why I think the Iranians are basically going to view this as deception. It may be something else, but that's not something that the Iranians are going to think about in their planning. There are lots of very strange things happening. If you watch the Iranian foreign minister's interview on an American morning program, he was saying that at the negotiating table, the Americans were not demanding zero enrichment. And so this could be one of two things. Either the United States is putting on a show or trying to put pressure on Iran, but it wants a deal. And so at the table, it's doing something very different. At the negotiating table, it's behaving very differently than what's happening across the region and what it's saying in the media and in public. Or this could be deception again. And that the United States, the talks were fake, are fake. And just like they were before the 12-Day War, it was clear that the talks were a form of deception. So I think for the Iranians, the safest bet is to just take everything as deception. The British have always been good poodles, the British government, of course, good poodles to the United States. There's no reason to think that they will behave differently this time round. If they do, it's not something that the Iranians are going to plan for. They're going to plan for the worst. Just like at the negotiating table, if the United States is behaving reasonably, Iran will continue to negotiate. But that is not going to change Iran's plans. And it is assuming that there will be war, that Diego Garcia will be used, that the United States will carry out or try to carry out a sudden attack. It may happen tonight. It may happen tomorrow night. It may happen next week. It may happen in 2 weeks. But what is clear is that the window of opportunity for the United States is not all that long, because the expenses incurred by the Trump regime are huge, and they will be. It will be very difficult for them to sustain this for very long. For Iran, this is its own home turf, and therefore the costs are much more limited, and Iran can wait the U.S. out. So the Iranians are waiting for war, but they will continue to negotiate, because last time round, even though Western media collectively were supporting the Israeli aggression, and I think after Gaza, Western media has been fully exposed, and anything that they say about Iran is just nonsense, or about Lebanon, or about Palestinians. It's all nonsense. I think people have reached that stage where they recognize that, except for maybe 70-year-old Americans or 60-year-old Americans, or Europeans. But I think back then it was quite clear, it was evident that across the global South and inside Iran too, the fact that Iran was at the negotiating table and the United States chose to attack helped Iran a lot. It helped enhance Iran's support across the world and strengthen resolve among ordinary Iranians at home. So even though, because some people are saying, why are you negotiating? This is just a lie. This is just deception. Quite possibly. But Iran is not going to be fooled. Iran is negotiating because it wants the world to see that it's not Iran that's going to carry out aggression. If there is war and Iran is not negotiating, of course, Iran's carrying out indirect negotiations. If there's war, then Western media will say, well, if the Iranians had negotiated, this would not have happened. Because Western media has no, these journalists, mainstream journalists, they have no sense of dignity or honor or honesty. We see it in the numbers that they write about, peaceful protesters, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands killed. They're basically just trying to prepare the ground for war. That's their job. Again, whether it's The Guardian or The Independent or MSNBC or Fox News and Breitbart and Sky News, they're all the same. They're all the same. One is more subtle, sophisticated. One is more bombastic, but they're all the same. So they will go out and say, well, this could have been avoided if only Iran had talked. So Iran is not going to give them that opportunity. Iran is going to show the world and ordinary Iranians that we tried. If it works, fine. If it doesn't, it hurts the Americans.
Yeah, no, I wish I could disagree about the media, but I find it troubling the way this is reported, because when they're now building the case for war in the media, they're essentially repeating the same thing. That is, the tens of thousands of civilians were slaughtered by the regime. We have to do something. This is, it's the usual humanitarian intervention argument being pushed. But the media has a role here, because only today the foreign minister of Iran, he tweeted out that Iran had it already released this list of all the victims during the insurrection, which amounted to 3,117. But that included, of course, all the officers and government officials who had been murdered. So if you're a journalist and your job is to inform the public, indeed, you look for what is true and of public interest. What you want to go and do then is go through this list, and then if there are names, in this tens of thousands which aren't on this list, okay, well, bring it forth, and then you can expose if this is not truthful. But if you just ignore what is happening on the other side because you fear that could undermine the narrative for selling a war to justify the war that's coming, you're not a journalist at all. You are war propagandist. Again, this is the fact that no one is responding to this, that they're not investigating it. Indeed, that just this dismissal that, well, Iran, this is Iran, everything they say is propaganda. There's no point to even take it because it's serious. It's very, it's not great for the journalistic practices. So let's choose the words in this way. Just a last question though. You said that Iran.
One point that I'd like to add here, and that is they do the exact opposite. The independent journalists that came to Iran for the February 11th celebrations of the 47th anniversary of the victory of the revolution, they saw massive protests or demonstrations in support of the Constitution. 4 million people came to the streets in Tehran alone, and there were tens of millions across the country. They came to see, because during after the deadly riots or the semi-coup attempt, the armed insurrection on January the 8th and 9th, there were mass demonstrations across Iran against the rioters, and there were up to 3 million people in Tehran. And Musk and the West, they were saying this is AI. They showed helicopter footage of the crowd in Tehran, which was massive, and they were trying to pretend that this is AI. So on February the 11th, we saw independent journalists coming to Iran, and they went and saw the protests, and the people in Tehran came in even larger numbers, probably because they saw how Elon Musk and Western media were trying to downplay the real numbers. So the rally in Tehran and everywhere else was larger. And but those independent journalists, Western journalists who went back, they're now being attacked and smeared, and because they went to Iran and exposed how, in fact, people are not with these terrorists and with these, the Pahlavi and the MEK terror group and the separatists and all those people funded by Western intelligence agencies. And that people do not believe their fake numbers of, many thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. And yes, if they had any integrity, they would say, okay, let's see the names and compare them and see what other names we have. They won't do that because they don't have such names, and that's not the objective. Again, no one should be fooled. There's no difference between the BBC, the Guardian, the Times, or Breitbart and the New York Times. They're all one and the same. They're owned by the Epstein class, and they are there for propaganda purposes. These are the people who've been whitewashing the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the slaughter of Palestinians and Lebanese. Again, yesterday the Israelis carried out horrific massacres across Lebanon, killing children, but that's not of interest to the Western media. So they have no credibility, and Iran is, I think Iran recognizes that the best way to deal with them is to is to focus on the global majority and ordinary people in the West who are seeing the reality increasingly, and the Western media obviously does not have the influence that it had a couple of decades ago. It is deteriorated, it has declined very rapidly, and Gaza was a turning point. So Iran has lots of support across the world, and people across the world, many people across the world, don't believe the propaganda. And I think that as U.S. propaganda capabilities and Western propaganda capabilities decline, their military capabilities decline, their economic capabilities decline, it's going to get worse for them and more difficult. And if they carry out war with Iran, I think we will see a very rapid collapse of the Western or U.S. empire, much more rapid than we were expecting.
Yeah, no, I have quite a few problems over here myself for interviewing people like you, which I'm accused of assisting regime propaganda for Iran. So it's yeah, it's not well. You can smell the no, well, the desperation there when one loses narrative control, and yeah, what happens to free speech under those conditions. But the last question I had for you, though, was you mentioned before that Iran is just now waiting for the war to begin, which, well, it seems not to be unavoidable, but it seems that it's coming now. But at the same time, I'm also watching all these Chinese satellite pictures showing all the concentration of the American military hardware. And, when you mentioned that Iran's waiting, are there any discussions or considerations about preemptive strikes? Again, I just want to make it clear, I'm not advocating anything. I'm very curious about the strategic thinking in Iran. That is, if this is, as you said, an existential threat, a war for survival, there's this unprecedented military hardware being lined up all around Iran. The capabilities are there, the intentions are clear, and there's a strategic benefit in striking first. Is this entering the strategic discourse in Iran? Again, you can say it's better to be attacked first, so it's, Iran doesn't get accused of an unprovoked attack on the U.S. But on the other hand, who strikes first can be quite critical. I'm just curious if this is a discussion at all in Iran at the moment.
This is a key point, actually. Iran, based on its religion, especially in Shia Islam, it will not initiate war. Just like Iran never produced chemical weapons when the West was giving Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to use extensively against Iranians. According to the religious views of the Iranian leadership, those chemical weapons are not moral, so they never produce them. The same was true with nuclear weapons. Iran could have had nuclear weapons many, many years ago. Iran has had that capability for a very long time, but it itself chose not to have them. Of course, the Iranians have also said that if the fate of the nation is at stake, then they would change their nuclear posture. But in any case, that is this is all based on their religious belief. But what we are seeing now is a situation where the Iranians are saying that we'll not wait to be hit first. As soon as we're sure that we're confident that an attack is happening, we'll strike. And that, of course, creates enormous danger too, because if the United States could do something stupid and create misunderstanding and start a war through its stupidity. Because again, we're not for sure. It's not clear that the United States wants a war yet. We're assuming they do, but we don't know because the Zionists want the war. We're assuming that will happen, but we don't really know. It could go either way. So the United States may carry out some sort of stupid provocation, or send a large number of planes into the air, and then the Iranians will interpret that as the preparation for attack, and then the Iranians will strike. So Iran is not going to wait till the United States carries out its first wave and then respond. So Iran is not going to initiate war. It never has. It's always been, aggression has been carried out against Iran. We saw that when the West encouraged Saddam to invade and then assisted him with all sorts of weapons and funding, especially from these regimes in the Persian Gulf. They too were a part of it. And of course, the Germans were the ones who gave the chemical weapons, which I survived, but many didn't. Then there was the 12-Day War, the sanctions regime, which is a brutal regime. I mean, it's quite stunning, Glenn. It's quite stunning. As you and I are speaking, they are starving Cuba, but the Western media is not talking about it. They are starving kids in Cuba, women and kids, and imposing a siege. And even this, Trump alluded to this in his when he was lashing out at the Supreme Court. He alluded to what he's doing in countries like Cuba, but he was, I think, alluding to Cuba in particular. quite a few admissions were made in that in a few, during the last few hours about Jolani, about strangling countries, about all sorts of things. But the point is that as we speak, Western media is now focused on dehumanizing Iran and Iranians and trying to portray it as utterly evil to prepare the grounds for war. But their government is strangling the people of Cuba, 10 million people, and they won't even talk about it. So, this is where we are right now. This is the world that we live in. It's a war. It's a world where the Epstein class has exposed itself, and it is now functioning out in the open. And Trump is the most important representative of the Epstein class. So it's really in the world today, it is the axis of resistance against the Epstein class, and I have no doubt that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the axis of resistance, whose sin is opposing genocide, whose sin is that they're the only ones, the only states, the only entities that are actively opposing genocide. They're saying don't kill Palestinian kids. They're not Amalek. That's their sin, and I have no doubt that they will persevere.
Yeah, now for a class which has this collective identity and legitimizes all action based on humanitarianism, it is quite shocking that one can't even talk about Cuba, that it doesn't even appear in the media. But yeah, there we are. So, well, thank you for taking the time, and yes, please stay safe. This looks like it could be some very dangerous days ahead.
We do what we have to do, and I will do what I have to do like everyone else. I will continue being with you and other colleagues as far as long as I can find an internet connection, and I'm not going to be intimidated. Come what may.